Hello, I'm Simon Caplan, the Director of Education at the Pincus Fund for Jewish Education. And I'm in conversation with Dr. Jonathan Mirvis, who is a Melton Center Senior Lecturer at the Seymour Fox School of Education at the Hebrew University. Have I got that right, Jonathan? Good.
Correct.
Right. Jonathan specializes in social entrepreneurship in education, and especially Jewish education. And Jonathan is the author of It's Our Challenge, which I have at home. It's Our Challenge, a social entrepreneurship approach to Jewish education. So, Jonathan, there's a broad consensus that whatever the future holds, it will be fundamentally influenced by the events of the last 4 months. And that who knows how long continuation after that. And even though for every 2 Jews there are usually 3 opinions, that consensus still holds true. We've been involved in perhaps a unique change moment, which right now takes the form of an emergency health and economic crisis, but which will affect the way in which we approach a wide range of issues across the planet, including health, the economy, climate change, and of course education in general, and our subject, Jewish education. So I suppose the first question for you is something like, what does getting back look like? Can we get back? And moreover, even if we can get back, should we get back? What's your take on this?
So I think, speaking as a grandfather in the situation, and it's got grandchildren at school and frameworks, it's desperate that we get back to some type of normality and some type of routine. But existentially, I'm not sure that I really want to go back to where we were. And I mean, I think that we actually have a remarkable opportunity and privilege to devise the future. In fact, I'm actually jealous of young educators today, because where there's, I and you, Simon, and we both were a part of the Jerusalem Fellows.
The old generation.
Absolutely. We basically moved into a reality which has played itself up through to this very day. But I really believe we're in a completely different board. I mean, this is nothing less than as though a tsunami, or God forbid, we've been hit by a war. This is almost like the difference between the world between the First World War and the Second World War. And this is where we are. The world is in complete turmoil, and it's going to be for time to come. And it is critical that the world that we move forward is the world that we really want, and not the world that we were thrown into. And therefore, as Jewish educators, we have the responsibility to ensuring that the world that we're going to be moving into is a terrific world, and I think is going to be a better world than the world that we left.
You know, we were chatting before, and you made a distinction between getting back and going back. Perhaps I could ask you to, you know, what's the difference?
I think getting back is getting back into a routine in which we're in some type of structure, and our lives have structure, and we know what we're doing tomorrow. That's what getting back.
Yeah. Going
back is basically going back to the paradigms which have basically created the educational system which we had. The reality is that we're not going back to the system that we had. And the reason why I say this is that all those systems which operate outside government-supported systems, for instance, in Israel, and to some degree in the UK, but outside of these systems, where it's all private support, the economic realities are that we cannot go back to where we were.
Right.
Because the private funding of Jewish education, as well as tuition paid by parents, is not going to be there. And therefore, the question that we have is, okay, so taking out that major essence or building block of the system, what happens next? And I must say, this is not only our question, this is a question across the board. All economic systems are asking the same questions. Airlines are asking the same questions. The hospitality business are the same questions.
Absolutely.
How do we... Right.
It may not be only the financial issues, or it's semi-financial. The structure of the school is based around, you know, the students going there in the morning and coming back in the afternoon. we can't know for certain what will be, but it's quite likely that a continuation of social distancing will mean that class sizes will be an issue. The facilities of the school. In Israel, we have, 30, 35, 40 kids sometimes in a classroom smaller than the classroom I grew up in as a child. So there are all sorts of factors that mean actually we can't go back.
So I want to basically jump over the intermediate period where we were going to go through social distancing. The questions that I'm thinking about are when we will have a vaccine, when we will be able to return to some type of, what I would say, normal distance routine. Then the question comes is, what type of schools we'll have, what type of informal structures we'll have. And this is what I say is we cannot go back, because when we do go back to these situations, we will not have the funding that we had in previous times. And therefore, we're actually on a different train. We have to think about, we were derailed, we got on a different train. At the moment, we don't know where we're going to, but we, as Jewish educators, have the privileges to be in the driving seat and basically to pull out our compasses and plot our way forward without having
the financial question is, a kind of a negative issue. We just can't. But I suspect that even if the financial issue weren't, the prime issue, you've talked to me in the past about, how much has Jewish education actually got to reach out into the target population today?
Okay,
we had that opportunity to get back.
Okay, so Simon, you've divulged something from behind the closed doors. My sense is that Jewish education was actually, the train was going to become derailed anyway.
Yeah.
In other words, what's really happened is that outside forces derailed the train. Mm-hmm. But I think we were actually on the wrong train, even in the previous time. Basically, we're in a situation of inertia because we had a system in which people felt was, it's not broken, why fix it? I think it's actually highly, highly problematic. And if you just give me 2 or 3 minutes, I just want to explain in terms of what I'm really relating to. Every system in the nonprofit world, and particularly education, there are 4 pillars which give it health and which give it a sense of sustainability and enable it to perform the functions and the social mission, which is so important. The first is, and I call it the 4 Ps, the participants. If we don't have participants, we don't have students, we're out of business. That's the core business, basically to bring education to as many Jews as possible. The second thing is, the second P is personnel. If we don't have those agents who are going to be educational resources, etc., we're also out of business. The third P is what I call pennies, or the price. If we don't have the pennies in order to operate the system.
We found a P that worked.
Absolutely, we're out of business. And the 4th P is the product. If the standard of the product does not create the educational impact, then ultimately the students who we've managed to draw in, the system that we've managed to create will not achieve its success becoming an impactful educational medium.
Right.
Now, it's very difficult to generalize because every country is different and etc. But by and large, looking at the map, I personally feel that we weren't on the way to achieving universal participation. In other words, too few young people and older people are involved in education, and particularly, for instance, in the United States on a high school level, for those kids who aren't Orthodox. Number 2, personnel is a critical crisis in the area. A, having knowledgeable, passionate personnel, and B, personnel who aren't burnt out, and the attrition of quality personnel. We have a personnel crisis, which I don't have to tell the Pincus Fund about because that is your mission, and you've done a tremendous amount in the past few years in order to alleviate, but you will agree with me that we have far to go.
Absolutely.
The third issue is,
I think I'd like to get back to that in more detail in the positive sense of if we're not talking about the going back, but we're talking about the moving forward. then the major question, which we'll leave to one side, but is, what is the Jewish educator of the future? Does this change that conception? Does it change the training of a teacher? Who is the participant? Who is the audience for the teacher? What are the methods for the teacher? So let's kind of leave that, but I really want to get back to that.
Absolutely. That's really the heart of the whole enterprise. If we don't have excellent people in the system to operate the system, we're out of business. The third, of course, is the pennies. And for too long, quality Jewish education has basically been too expensive. In a sense, it's deprived many Jewish families of a rich Jewish education. It's almost priced itself out of the market in the private sector, and is a very serious question whether it's becoming sustainable. Not only it's expensive for philanthropy, but also for parents. Parents are paying, I would say, too much or asked to pay too much for the Jewish education, even though I believe, again, it's the most valuable thing. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure that parents who want to ensure that the kids have a Jewish education have to be impoverished. And the fourth issue is the product.
By the way, just to interrupt, in the many conversations we have with our projects and finding out how they all relate to this, the common theme amongst all those in the formal sector is simply the queue round the corner of parents seeking scholarship support, because they have to make some very hard choices now. A huge number of us have become unemployed. We have to make these decisions, and that alone could break the school system, not to speak of the philanthropic world, and to what extent the philanthropic world will have suffered from the recessions that we're moving into.
And it's my assumption that for every parent standing around the corner and asking for tuition relief, there are 2 or 3 who need it, but are too embarrassed to stand around the corner. So I think that the problem is far greater than we even think it is. And the fourth issue is the standard of the product. I'm not sure that even though the system itself, the formal system, informal systems are costing what they're costing, that we are getting the impact that we need in order to create, I would say, highly impactful education experiences. I think that's another question which raises, this a serious issue. So basically, on all 4 Ps, I think we have a tremendous amount to move forward. And then there comes the opportunity. Because
I'm going to say, up till now, maybe slightly gloomy, but I think we Jews are a gamzula tova kind of approach, and we like to see the glass half full. And in a sense, this has been the most amazing, fascinating kind of experiment where the world, and us, and the Jewish people included, have had to suddenly move into an alternative reality and experience a different type of lifestyle. And it's raised all these questions. So, your point is, so now, in this laboratory, what is the opportunity, or what do we learn, or what are we learning?
Okay, so even just before we get to the opportunity, I would say the gloomy was, even if we had the discussion 6 weeks ago, it would have been as gloomy. I would say the good news is that we're on another train. That's the great news. And the question is, where is this train going to go? And I actually want to start from the most basic issues of the great story. Education has often been a case of top-down. When I mean top-down, people make policy, they train teachers, they go into the classroom. This whole laboratory, Simon, that you're describing has actually been a bottom-up experience. In other words, it's been teachers, educators, formal and informal, have been thrown into an unprecedented situation and told, make something happen.
Deal with it,
Deal with it. And teachers who've had no background in technology, who've never done online programming, informal educators who to this point of time have never done informal education through technology, have suddenly found themselves doing things that they've never imagined. In other words, their imaginations have been released. So I would say that is the most incredible starting point, because that's where innovation and entrepreneurship starts on the ground floor, and we've basically released a tremendous amount of creative energy. And that's what I mean when I say is, let's not put the genie back in the bottle. Right. Now, let's release this genie and let's see where we're going to go to.
By the way, at the fund, we try to think like strategically about how to maximize the capacity of the sort of human element in education. And another perhaps hidden way in which we have an opportunity here is that the esteem in which the educator is held has gone up several points as parents have encountered their children at home all day, every day, realizing the need for education and saying, my God, how do these teachers do it? So we have an opportunity where the educator has kind of been more prominent in the eyes of the parent than perhaps ever before.
Absolutely, but I think that's a little bit of a negative side. In other words, what we're saying is that we appreciate it because of our absence. I want to say on the positive side, I think we're appreciated because all those educators who've involved in creating new programming, etc., who have been given, I would say, given the ability to go wild, just do something creative. And ultimately, there's another second factor. Within the system, basically all formal educators have become informal educators. What do I mean? We don't have students in front of it. If the student who's sitting on the other side of the screen going to be attentive to me, it's only if I've got something important to say. And therefore,
but here we have the mute button. That's what teachers don't have in the classroom. So, but yes.
Yes, but in reality, yes. But I would say is getting the person who's the listening, the student involved, which is, I think, the be-all and end-all of education. If you don't start in engagement on the most minimal level, it'll never happen. And I think this is where our teachers have been tested, and remarkably many have succeeded. So what I want to say is that I think when we talk about strategic, the issue then becomes, how do we take these creative energies and make sure that they run with it? Because the new structures that we're going to create are going to be based on these successful experiments which are happening in today's laboratory, some which you illustratively described.
Right. You've mentioned the technology, and that's the obvious side, that the need for the teacher to be able to be competent and to be able to handle and to be able to create with the technology is the clear-cut change here, and we've actually got a project of trying to create a network of Jed-tech savvy young teachers who can help others in the classroom. But the fact is that it's not only, or maybe even the biggest issues maybe even aren't about the technology. That's, it's to a certain extent a technicality. It also relates to the question of the production of different type of material, and relating to the content of education. But it also relates to, the whole role of the educator. Educators have been communicating more than ever with parents. Which teacher training program do you know of that actually trains a teacher to be able to work with the parents? Now, you could say that, okay, in 2 months or 3 months, 4 months, the schools will be open and that will go away, but will they? The point I made before, maybe the school day we don't know, maybe it'll be a shorter school day. Maybe it'll be a mixed solution between smaller numbers in classrooms for a lesser amount of time and an increase in the online offering as part of an integrated curriculum. I mean, we don't know, but these things are not too difficult to predict that they might be the case.
Absolutely. Simon, you basically, I think, very quickly jumped over the issue of technology, but I want to emphasize why I think this is really it's a systemic change which has happened. Mm-hmm. Within the area of social startups, and I've been involved in social startups in this country and in Israel, and it's become a very big issue. One of the things that we find in the startup business is that it's driven by content people who then go to a technologist and ask them to do something. For instance, if somebody was involved in medicine, what happens is that you have a certain medical issue, you understand what the technology is needed in order to make it happen, and then you go to a technologist who will basically make it happen. That's really how startups work. Right. They don't necessarily originate from technology, they originate from the content person. In the educational world, we have basically been one behind. We have, educators' perceptions have been is, how do we respond to technology? Mm-hmm. The question's now been flipped. How should technology respond to us? Right. This is systemic change. In other words, when the teacher says, I want to do ABC, I know it can be done. I don't know how to do it. Therefore, I need a technologist to make it happen for me. That will create the next issue that you're talking about is the blended learning structure, the new structures. But we could never even talk about that until educators were in the driving seat. In fact, I see this whole laboratory exercise as far as my perceptions are that basically educators are now driving technology and not being driven by technology.
Yeah.
And given that, we then have the possibility of envisioning questions which you've now raised, and I want to break it up into two. You spoke about formal and informal, and you spoke about the home. Let's talk about the formal, informal. Let's talk about it as two different issues because they are both mega issues. Right. I would say the issue, let's go to the second one, the issue of the home. There is no doubt about it that the paradigm in which education is outsourced, parents go to work, pay educational systems in order to bring their children up Jewish, and they basically pay the bills and put them to bed. Well, it doesn't work, and it will never work because the reality doesn't work that way. Yeah. And what's shown us in this sort of program is, parents, you have the ability, and not only have the ability, I think many parents have actually enjoyed bringing education within their home. And therefore the question now is, do we walk away from that reality?
Yeah. What's fascinating there is that, I mean, I'm speaking from a UK perspective. I suspect it's true around the world as well. But, in essence, the school replaced the home. I mean, the growth of the day school was as there was a decline in the capacity of the home to provide an environment that built Jewish identity in one way or another. And we're in this fascinating situation now where, in a sense, the ball has been thrown back to the home and there is a response. There is a positive response. And there is a way of combining the school and the home in a way that there wasn't 15 or 20 years ago.
Right. I mean, Simon, it's not only in the UK, the whole of the Israeli yeshiva high school system was basically built on the assumption is that kids have to be in a dormitory 24-hour environment in order to basically extricate them from the home. In other words, exactly what you're talking about is, so basically the yeshiva high school saw itself as an alternative system to the home. And suddenly, as you say, we're back to square one. The home is we're basically back. The most fundamental thing is that ultimately it is parents. It's parents who are responsible for the education of their kids. And as responsibility, because there's responsibility, we have to, and I think this is what I think you were hinting at, Simon, the challenge is, coupled with this responsibility, can we empower parents in order to do this in a meaningful way? And that's the challenge of the future, yes.
Right. Yeah, I remember somewhere back in the mists of time, there was this great discipline called family education. It may be still strong in the States, but I don't encounter, our work at the Pincus Fund is the whole Jewish world, apart from the States and Israel. And I don't encounter family education these days. Do you think there may be a move back in that direction?
I would say yes, but not in the name of family education. And the ones who are actually leading this are PJ Library.
Yeah.
PJ Library, which basically started as a book for a kid, has become much wider than a book for a kid.
Right.
It's basically, at least in this, I know, and I followed very closely, the tremendous family support they've given within this last crisis. They've really taken upon themselves the onus of bringing Jewish education within the family structure. And I think that the way that PJ Library has, been received by families, showed there is a thirst for something. But ultimately the question is, can we move beyond PJ Library?
I would add, though, to PJ Library, I would also add phenomena such as Limud, where you have, and maybe others. I don't, I don't want to give the whole list, but there are phenomena where Judaism is simply treated as a massive celebration, as a rich thing, as something that isn't the province of the expert who has to convey it down to the non-expert. And I think there is a different environment in which this can actually flow.
Absolutely, but Simon, once that we pick up that switch, then we move into a completely different set of questions in terms of, yes, can this become a do-it-yourself business? In other words, education, does education have the future of a do-it-yourself business? And I think that one of the things that we've learned as well is, yes, we have resources and we will continue to produce resources. And then the questions become is, what is the relationship between these resources, the family, the formal structures, the informal structures? But this is all part of our very exciting future.
Right, absolutely. Now, come on, we've got to say, what about Israel? And I raised the question of Israel in a very specific sort of Jewish educational perspective, which is, if you like, chinuch chavayati, effective, experiential education. Israel was this huge resource to both formal and informal education by the Chavaya Israeli, the Israel experience. We're now stuck, travelers, even when this all opens up, it will be a very long time before, people will be comfortable with sending their kids off for gap years and Masa. And we know, because we're project-based, how many projects have, had to pull out, without the choice, but they're not going to come back so easily. So how does Israel, now figure into this exciting reality, but with a lot of constraints?
Okay, so you're raising some very, very, very serious questions. I think also the assumptions of how long it will take to get back, etc. Again, we don't know. We have no sense of it. And obviously, we've got to prepare for worst case scenario and best case scenario. Yeah. But we are, again, in terms of technology, we have new technologies. For instance, the whole issue of augmented reality and virtual reality, in which you can bring people into a situation in which, I don't know if you've seen the latest Google glasses, which you can look through a 3D situation. Right, we can create.
These are going to be tools,
Okay, so we can create certain realities. It's nothing like being on the ground. And I think that's the challenge. But I would say the good news is that Google Glasses can get to far many more kids than Israel can. Right. So we have the situation in which this is disruptive innovation, in which, yes, it's not as good as the reality, but we're going to have to find supplemental, educational, experiential things which are going to make it happen, which I see as a positive and not a negative. Right. The positive is because basically we will be challenged to reach far more people at a far cheaper price and to create an impactful product, which we're really thinking about.
Right. I just want to make a skip back to the educator. I think another sort of fascinating aspect of this is that Zoom, of course, has made it big in this scenario, but there are other similar possibilities. The educator can potentially reach, the star speaker, the entertainer can reach a vastly wider audience through these kinds of methodologies. And, our experience has been that there are stars, but those stars are not kind of coordinated anyway, or necessarily reaching the maximum potential. They may be stars within their local community or a geographical region. But the possibility to sort of grow and expand the number of stars, I think has increased. The technology was there before, but the understanding of how accessible and how easy it is to access that technology, I think that has grown. The other point I just wanted to make as you were speaking, which is, it's extraordinary. What is the expression "Makdim trufa le makar"? Yeah, that the cure is always somehow created in advance of the disease. We always somehow find it. And can you imagine if this pandemic would have happened even 10 years ago, certainly 15 or 20 years ago? We actually have, some of the cures, and I don't mean the medical cures, obviously, to make this a reality and to kind of move forward as opposed to going back.
Absolutely. But Simon, I want to touch on another aspect of what you brought, is how the technology has opened the possibilities of resources.
Yeah.
You mentioned quite correctly that it can bring expertise to local, which is critical given the geographical spread of the Jewish world and the few resources that we have. And I think, again, enabling people to interact with community, even though they're sitting in geographically a different situation, I think is a tremendous plus, and it's tremendous important educational value. But there's something else which is unlocked, and I think this should not be overlooked in terms of education. And that is the ability to communicate with peers across the globe.
Yeah.
I think that peer-to-peer, in the commercial world, there is a tremendous attempt to downplay institutions and upplay peer-to-peer. We've seen this for Airbnb, for instance, instead of hotel. We see this in banking now. Why go to a bank and get a loan if you can do peer-to-peer? We see this in so many situations. This has become, because of technology, this has become a possibility. And I think in education, the time has come as well to look at peer-to-peer. Now, what do I mean? You've got different kids in different situations who have different strengths. Kids in Israel want to learn English. Kids in America may want to learn about Judaism. Kids in France want to learn about X. And one of the things I think that we've all learned about education is that, as opposed to other fields in which I think that the more your experience grows and your hair becomes white, the better you become. I think in education, it's becoming a disadvantage because you're becoming more distant from the student. Peers are the closest to our students.
Yeah. I love you for plugging one of our main areas of interest, which is the development of professional learning communities, of communities of practice, things that can national community. Even within one country, there's still a huge amount of isolation and bedidut, of the individual teacher. And we've created in a number of places. We've partnered with national organizations that want to create a national network of their teachers, global. I mentioned before the Educational Technology Group, which is a Europe-wide of people, of educators who have a topic in common. And we really feel at the fund that this is an incredibly important direction.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think it's on two levels. Definitely it's on the professional level, but I think it's also on a student level. In other words, the more we can encourage kids to learn from each other, the better. And the more we can encourage teachers to learn from each other, the better. So I think that this is all part of, we talk about the Zoom situation. This is highly, highly promising.
Right. Okay, so Jonathan, we've skipped from being gloomy to being ecstatic. Now I want to bring us back to the issue of between the gloomy and the ecstatic. In other words, the strategy. What we know is that the day after, literally the day after, head teachers of schools and boards of governors are going to be scrambling on a number of fronts, not least the financial front, but other fronts as well. People are going to be focused on very hard realities. And the question is, so how do you get from that, you know, to what we're doing now, which is kind of clear blue sky, you know, thinking, zero-based thinking. So that's what I think. That's part, at least in part, what you're going to do.
I would say, I think absolutely. I mean, I think the real question is, what are our strategic goals and how are we going to make it happen?
Yeah.
And how they're not going to be wiped out by tomorrow, because tomorrow is very, very threatening. And I want to make a clear distinction between tomorrow and the next academic year.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, I think we've just got to get on our feet and get moving. I mean, I think that's for our sanity, our health, etc. But when we plan for the next year, I think we've got to start factoring in and make an inventory of what worked. What worked? Mm-hmm. And here we have to listen to our educators. A tremendous amount of listening. In other words, parallel to putting the system back on its feet tomorrow, we need to take stock of what happened. A tremendous amount of listening, formal research, informal research. This is a critical piece of the puzzle. Yeah. And even more so, we've got to continue to release our educators, not to limit them, but quite the opposite. Mm-hmm. Yes, we need to accomplish certain things within certain constraints, but I think that is the key issue. In other words, how to keep the dynamism, and now I'm coming to the most critical piece, is how we fund the dynamism. Yeah, that's the critical piece. And we're not talking about mega grants. We talk about micro grants, because when we're talking about on that level, we're not talking about major funding. We're talking about micro laboratory projects. What I'm thinking about, Simon, is I think that you're coining this as a laboratory stage. Let's continue the laboratory stage. Right. Yeah. In other words, the issue is, it's not just walk. I think we've been forced to create something which should never have been. But in reality, let's take what we have. And where do I see the laboratory? The issue of experimentation. In other words, the spirit of experimentation has to continue. And we have to give room for it, and we have to reward it. This is a strategic goal, because once we get through that stage, then I think we can really see a tremendous future. Yeah. And that is in terms of what have we built? And again, the technology questions are critical. The issues of utilization of time, utilization of resources, peers, authorities, global, local. In other words, but this basically means that we are all now going on parallel tracks. Yeah. Every administrator has to think in parallel tracks, almost 3 tiers. 1, what am I doing tomorrow? 2, what am I doing in 6 months' time? But number 3, where am I going? And I think those are the critical questions which, on the one hand, are exhausting, but the other hand, they're so liberating, because we're liberated from yesterday.
Yeah, I very much like the idea of, you know, continuing the experiment. You know, I went to Carmel College, and the mantra of the leadership of Carmel College was sitting astride 2 cultures. That one of the great advantages that the Jew has in the diaspora is that he has a reference. He has living in one situation, he can also bring the comparison from another situation. And in a way, you know, we could see this as something we've all experienced this sufficiently to go through the initial shock, the looking after the needs of next day, the trying to figure out a way to make our lifestyle work around this, and you know, the idea of not just laying that to one side and sort of putting it aside and now getting on with the other reality, but actually sort of bringing this experiment into the new reality. I think that's it's a great way of looking at it. Yeah. Jonathan, I think probably now has come the stage where you can plug your book.
Okay, I would say, you know,
I know you've written about these issues, but explain to the listener what this is all about and why they should buy or obtain for free or whatever.
Okay, so firstly, nobody should buy or nobody should do anything, and I think that's really important. What I really tried to do was to look at the macro issues of entrepreneurship and innovation as principles. I will say from the outset, this book is outdated. The moment Corona came in, the book became outdated. Yeah. And in fact, I was saved a tremendous amount. And why? Because I've been contemplating a second edition. And if I would have put out a second edition, it would have been outdated. Why? Because the old world is outdated. Mm-hmm. So, yes, the book is about the formal world, correct. But on the other hand, the book draws from business paradigms, social paradigms, and asks itself questions which are pertinent to Jewish education. Mm-hmm. An example, for instance, the late Professor Clayton Christensen developed the notion of disruptive innovation, which is really pertinent to today in business in terms of, can I create something which is far cheaper, which appeals to a greater audience, and is not necessarily of a high quality, but in the future it will have. That is a very central issue in business today and going in the future. Mm-hmm. I think that question is a similar question in Jewish education, and that question I deal with in detail in my book. It's a central chapter in the book. And I would say there are many chapters which were written in the inspiration of commercial works which have brought businesses to where they are. Mm-hmm. But here, I want to say something which, again, I think is, I want to be modest about, but on the other hand, Jewish educational business.
Go ahead, be modest.
Business is, as we can see in Corona, business is a lifetime. Jewish education doesn't have a lifetime because Jewish education is the heart and soul of the Jewish people. Right. We're talking about nitzchiyut, we're talking about eternity. So what we're talking about things which are far greater and far richer. But if we can take the wisdom which exists in this world and translate it into our world and make ours a better world, I think ultimately we'll win. Right. So in terms of the book,
I loved reading your book, and I'd love other people to read your book. How can they get it?
Okay, so the book first did two things. So number one, you can get it off Amazon. And those of you who don't live in the United States, you can order it from Amazon. Secondly, Hugh Caxton is the publisher of the book. And the book is printed in Australia, and it's printed in Hugh Caxton, right? And it's printed in the United States, it's printed in England. And those of you who cannot get it either through Hugh Caxton or through Amazon, Book Depository, which is run by Amazon in the United Kingdom, they will ship the book free, as they ship all books to all parts of the world. And hope you have the opportunity. Thank you.
Right. Jonathan, my final question was going to be, it seems incredibly challenging. Are you more hopeful or more fearful moving forward, and why? But you know what? I'm not going to ask you that question because I think we've got the answer. And it's just been a pleasure talking with you. Let's hopefully we'll meet physically at some point in the near future.
Thank you. And I must say, I was just talking to you, Simon, in terms of the Pincus Fund. I mean, I think that we're both in very, very privileged situations. And I think that on the one hand, it's thrilling. There's tremendous responsibility. But I'll tell you what I'm fearful about. We're going to be accountable.
Yeah.
We cannot say that we were prisoners of the past because
Right.
we're driving the future. So, Simon, it's wonderful to talk to you. And I really hope and I'm confident that the Pincus Fund, together with the other leaders of the Jewish community, will ensure that ultimately we will really have a wonderful educational future. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan.